What are your thoughts on Founding Father James Wilson's view that the Revolutionary War was fought against a corrupt Parliament, not the Crown, and how this perspective of the war has been lost to time?
Well, I think there's a lot of merit to it. Eric Nelson, in his recent book, The Royalist Revolution, explores that very issue. And he brings up, I think, some very important facts. The Declaration of Independence itself was aimed against the king. And there are reasons for that come out in another book called The King's Three Faces, about the image of the king as an abstract in the colonies played out in his first 150 years. But it certainly is true that there was a segment of revolutionary opinion and revolutionary propaganda that appealed to the king over the head of Parliament and the ministry, which was responsible for Parliament. But here was the problem. George III, who has been described as a Jacobite without courage of conviction in the sense of wanting a real monarchy, he was between a rock and a hard place because, on the one hand, he believed in the settlement, the constitutional settlement of 1688, which placed sovereignty in Parliament, because that had put the Hanoverians, and thus himself, on the throne. Had they not had the sovereignty of Parliament, then the Stuarts were the rightful heirs, and that was it. But since the time of Queen Anne, when his grandfather and his great-grandfather had been kings after she died, power had slipped out of the hands of the king into those of his ministers in Parliament. Power that was still theirs under the 1688 Constitution. The reason for that was that George I spoke no English at all, and George II not well and didn't really care. They were both much more interested in Hanover than they were in England. And so they basically allowed the Prime Minister to usurp real control. But George was the first one of them whose first language was English. And as he described himself, he was the first of his family to glory in the name of Britain. So he was quite keen on reestablishing the status quo that had been under Queen Anne. The problem with that, however, was that to do so he had to have a prime minister of his own choosing. That didn't turn out very well the first time with the Earl of Bute, who was a favorite of his mother's and whom he had made his prime minister. He had to face total refusal to cooperate on the part of Parliament, the Whig majority. So he had to wait. And finally, in 1770, he got a prime minister that would do what he told him, and this was Lord North. But things like the stamp tax and all that, which had already poisoned the atmosphere, those he had no control over. And for him to simply try to administer the colonies directly without Parliament or the ministry, to him seemed to be completely unconstitutional. That was one side of the problem. Other side of the problem, though, was that there were obviously a lot of the Whig oligarchy in England who did not want him to retake that authority, and if anything, wanted to reduce him to another figurehead.
Right.
Similar to what we have now.
Right.
Those folks, in many ways, collaborated with the Whig oligarchies and each of the little oligarchies in each of the American colonies.
Yeah, that's one of the things that stood out to me in Puritan's Empire. Particularly, the most notable thing that makes me think of the two oligarchies, the one in the colonies and the one in the English collaborating, is General Howe.
General Howe.
As I was reading it, I was screaming that the loyalist general he's basically cheating. He was throwing the game.
He was throwing the game. And the best part of it was that when he retired and came back to England, he was summoned before a parliamentary inquiry committee, and he said, when he was asked, why'd you do that? He said, the answer to that question is political, and I choose not to give it.
What a scumbag.
Yeah, he really was. And then, of course, by that time, France ended the war, and that was the end.
Yeah.
Because without the superiority of the Royal Navy, there was no way that Britain could win. There was no way that the Loyalist troops, as opposed to the British troops, the American Loyalists, could be supplied. So, and then the final straw was when Catherine the Great of Russia organized what was called the League of the Armed Neutrality, in which she said basically that if Britain did not make peace with its colonies, every nation of Europe that was not already at war with her, France, Spain, and the Netherlands, other than them, would declare war.
Wow.
So there wasn't a lot they could do about that. And again, had it not been for Howe, the war would have been over very, very quickly. But, here's the but, it worked out as it did. And the author of the book, Royalist Revolution, makes a very, very good point. We remember what effect the revolution had on this country. We forget the effect it had on Britain, which was huge. And and again, as Phillips suggests in his book, Cousins' Wars, as Nelson says, when the War of the Constitution were done, on this side of the Atlantic, we had a monarchy without a king. And on the other side, they had a king without a monarchy.
Mm.
And so it's been ever since.
Wow.